I think a materialist approach to things is very, very consistent with my experience in Christian social justice.
I feel like the deeper I get into anarchist practice, the deeper my faith is getting at the same time.
I would hope that securing means of life for all would be something all people of faith would say, oh yes, that's at the basis of what we believe.
Those who are most marginalized know the most about the true, the good, and the beautiful.
To me, it's less that I think building class solidarity is a bad thing, as much as it seems like if you don't attend to things like anti-Black racism, that's always going to get in the way of building class solidarity, actually.
And when you go back, you find that a lot of revolutionary grassroots participatory movements, the precursors to what you could call the barrio assemblies and these grassroots neighborhood organizations, a lot of these were sponsored by the church.
What does it mean to say that the Christian tradition is internally contradictory and there are antagonisms there and you're always being faithful to some aspects and betraying other aspects?
Welcome to the Magnificast, a podcast about Christianity and leftist politics. I'm Dean Detloff.
And I'm Matt Bernico. This week on the show, we've got Jim Hodgson back on to explain the ongoing wave of protests in Haiti. In case you've never caught a Jim episode before, you're in for something really cool. Jim has devoted a big portion of his life to solidarity movements, working a lot with the United Church of Canada. He spent time and made connections throughout the Caribbean and throughout Latin America. One place he definitely knows quite a bit about is Haiti. So it's very helpful to get his perspective on the current situation there as it relates to, big ideas like solidarity and imperialism. Before we go right to Jim, though, let me give you the quick Magnificast sales pitch. So if you like the Magnificast, you can support us financially by subscribing to our Patreon at patreon.com/themagnificast. When you subscribe, you get access to all kinds of cool things like early episodes, sometimes. You get access to our Patreon-only current events podcast called The Lock-In. We make a lot of dumb jokes and talk about current events. It's pretty fun. You also get an invite to our exclusive Discord channel where we talk about all kinds of things and, make friends with other people who listen. It's a good time. And even if you subscribe to the highest levels, you get bonus merch like some cool stickers. So that's what you should do. I mean, if you really like what we're doing, it would be great if you give us a few bucks. That being said, though, if you can't support us right now, we totally understand. It is a global pandemic where unemployment is extremely high. We totally get it. It's fine. Don't stress out about it. So if you can't, you could also just head over to iTunes and leave us a nice review or say something nice about us on Twitter. Don't say anything mean about us on Twitter. That's so important. All right, on to the episode.
Welcome back to the show, Jim. For regular listeners of the Magnificast, Jim will not be a stranger. He's been on the show quite a bit. We like to have him on to help us understand what's going on in other parts of the world, where Jim has had a lot of experience in his recently previous role as a partnership coordinator at the United Church of Canada. So if you listen to the show for a long time, we've talked in the past about Venezuela and Bolivia in particular a few times, and we encourage you to check that out. Lots of great material on specific historical events there, but other things too. And this week we have him back to talk to us about what's happening in Haiti. Jim, for people who maybe haven't heard the show or haven't heard you on it before, could you say something a little bit about yourself? Who are you? Why are you invested in what's happening in somewhere like Haiti?
Yeah, thanks. It's good to be back with you, Matt and Dean. And I have a background in journalism and a fascination with Haiti that goes back almost 40 years. And so I had a chance to go to the Dominican Republic in 1983 and spent the 6 weeks there. And the people I hung out with were mostly sugarcane cutters in a rural area. And they taught me about the movement to get rid of Duvalier, the dictator at the time, the various ways that they've faced the opposition of the Reagan administration in those years, and all of that. And it just gave me a real drive to understand better what was going on. So the next year, in 1984, I went and had a short visit in Haiti, 2 weeks, again during the Duvalier period. And so, when you work under the conditions of a dictatorship as a journalist, you have to be a bit careful. And so, I was with religious folk, people who were doing kind of traditional charity work for the most part, but through that, I found people that I could talk with about the political situation in both countries, both the Dominican Republic and Haiti. So, and then now, like, there's been a lot of things that have happened over the years, and lots of in attempts to try to do things better. And now I'm kind of like, I'm a middle-aged white guy, sort of semi-retired, retired officially from the United Church of Canada, but still very much an activist. And but I'm very conscious in my old age of the errors of the past and of the ways that Haiti is portrayed in international media and discourse. The kind of low point of Trump making a very stupid comment about Haiti. But then even those of us who are well-intentioned, we use words like resilient and brave and creative, because all of that just masks power relationships, colonialism, imperialism. And most Haitians are impoverished because some other people are rich.
Thanks, Jim. We really appreciate your life experience and what your eye toward international struggles brings to our podcast. Well, we can start here. Right now, Haiti is in the midst of a mass protest against the current president, Jovenel Moise. There's a lot of different reasons for the opposition, corruption, as well as illegitimately extending his term being central to the impetus behind the protests. Though saying there's just a protest seems to really understate the story quite a bit. So, Jim, can you tell us what's going on currently with these protests in Haiti?
Yeah, it's we can get into this a bit, but there's what's been going on very actively since the end of 2019. There's a series of protests. They actually, like, some people would say no, it was really 2018, and others would say no, it goes back to 2011 with the election of the previous president. I mean, neither the current president Jovenel Moise or his predecessor Michel Martelly were Martelly, I should say, were elected in the best of circumstances. Anyway, so there's been kind of persistent protest, really clear since the end of 2019. And then in the past 2 months, since the beginning of the new year, very large demonstrations, provoking a situation that feels like the edge of an explosion. There have been, very dramatic points. In September, the head of the Bar Association, the lawyers in Port-au-Prince, was murdered. He was a noted constitutional scholar. This is blamed on the government. There have been a series of kidnappings, and these are, not political kidnappings, you could say. No, they're random street kidnappings for ransom. And those have touched countless people now. The niece of a Haitian Methodist minister that I know was one of the people kidnapped, and she was murdered. So that lack of security is sort of folded into the political anger. Jovenel Moise is considered to have overextended his period of constitutional authority by, he claims he has another year, but it's because of the way that the 2016 election was delayed. So people who oppose him say that the constitutional mandate is a given period, and just because he started late doesn't mean that he can tag it on at the end. And they go back actually to historical precedent where other presidents who've been interrupted in the midst of their term by a coup and then get power again. I've been told, no, you can't extend your period just because the military took over. So, this might not have been such an issue had Moise not been such a terrible president. So, yeah, so we can talk a bit more about that, and but we're kind of talking about a period since 2011 that has antecedents before that too.
Yeah, thanks. That helps a lot, Jim, to contextualize what's going on. It's hard to hear, obviously. It sounds like a very awful situation, and we've just been seeing it online. Basically, tons of people in the streets calling attention to those kinds of things, kidnappings, unrest, government corruption, etc. And I want to return to that resistance movement in a moment, and especially the role of religious and Christian people in particular in that resistance. But perhaps we could spend a little bit of time also contextualizing this moment in a longer story about Haiti. The country has a long history of revolt and opposition to colonial rule first, going, of course, back to the Haitian Revolution at the turn of the 18th century, still a very important event in the history of liberation movements. How could we understand what's going on in Haiti now in light of that long history of kind of throwing off colonial rule and thinking through what it means to live on their own terms?
Yeah, thanks. It is important to look back. It's an inspiring story. I mean, Haiti, very very shortly after the French Revolution, um, in 1791, the slaves rose up and began a revolutionary process that threw out the colonial power in 1804, and I sometimes understand it as, people who were enslaved looked at what was going on in France, that liberté, égalité, fraternité, and they said, "Hey, you've got that, we want some of that." And so the revolution began, and the slaves freed themselves. They were visionaries, and they weren't always united, and there were problems that followed, but there were also some very good leaders along the way. And so one of them was a man named Jean-Pierre Boyer, who was the president who in 1822 united Haiti with the Spanish colony at the east end of the island, Hispaniola. So Haiti took over the Spanish colony and freed the slaves. That's the thing to bear in mind about that. The white landowners in this old Spanish colony weren't so favorable, and eventually in 1844 they threw the Haitians out, and the Dominican Republic received its independence by throwing out the Haitians rather than throwing out the Spaniards. And so this is still a problem in the whole Dominican Haitian set of relations. But I've gone down a bit of I've gone off topic a bit with that comment. But again, going back to what was happening in Haiti, that 1804 triumph also inspired Bolivar and San Martin and the others who led anti-colonial movements in Latin America. Anyway, but with all of that inspiration, no other countries established relations with Haiti after its independence until the Vatican was the first, I think, 1860, and then the United States during the Civil War in 1862. So they were the first two. And so then after that, other countries began to develop relationships. But Haiti was punished and isolated. France demanded repayment for the loss of its colony, the loss of the slaves, and some say that the Haiti has never ceased to pay its supposed debt to France by the way that things have unfolded since then. So, like Haiti, kind of in that isolation, there were good moments and bad moments. There were various dictatorships. There was a long occupation by the United States from 1915 to 1934. There's a brilliant rebel leader who's remembered fondly by people now, whose name was Charlemagne Péralte. And so like through that history, there are high points and low points, heroes, people who would be the opposite of that. Maybe to move us along a bit, 1957. A medical doctor named François Duvalier took over, and he ruled as president for life. And when he died, his son took over, Jean-Claude Duvalier, again as president for life. And so the Duvalier regime stayed in power until 1984, when finally, again, the process of social mobilization led the Duvalier regime to its end, and Duvalier went off to exile in France.
Thanks, Jim. That's some really helpful context, I think, to understanding what's going on now. When you were talking a minute ago, you mentioned that there are, some famous and infamous leaders of Haitian history, and I think maybe it'd be a good time now to talk about one of the one of those very complex figures. Haiti is famously the first country to have ever elected a liberation theologian as president. I mean, maybe the only one ever. I don't really know. But we talked about him on the past in the podcast, Jean-Bertrand Aristide. We've done an episode on him, I think, maybe a year ago, but you've actually met him, so better than a podcast. And we know that you have some things to say about the movements behind Aristide and his presidency. His presidency kind of marked the end of the long years of Haiti suffering under the Duvalier dictatorships, but the country has also really struggled to find its feet since he was first elected in the 90s. Just generally, what did Aristide, as a priest on the left, represent for Haiti's struggle for liberation after the initial election?
Thanks. It's a complex figure, and I think Jean-Bertrand Aristide is somebody who merits more reflection and greater understanding. I had said before I went first to Haiti in 1984 while Duvalier was still in power, and had some encounters with opposition inside and outside of Haiti in those years. And I had a chance to go back in 1987 during the period after Duvalier's departure, and before 1990, there was a series of governments, sometimes military, sometimes not. There were coup regimes and whatnot. 1987 was kind of a high point of protest, a bit like now, where there were kind of rotating strikes, general strikes, on again, off again, huge pressure for elections and elections soon. And again, this effervescence. And one of the things I did that time was go to the cathedral in Port-au-Prince, and the people from the base Christian community movement who in Haiti are called the Petit l'Église, the little church, Petit l'Église. And they had taken over the cathedral to demand release of political prisoners and elections and what have you. And so I spent a day with these young folks, and they were so inspiring with their hope. And one of the people who gave them hope was this young priest whose name was Jean-Bertrand Aristide, who was preaching liberation theology in the poor neighborhoods around Port-au-Prince. And so a few years went by, and in 1990, I was working in Toronto with the Canadian Council of Churches. And because I had had experience in Haiti before, I was invited to go back to Haiti as an election observer. And so I went with the Caribbean Conference of Churches and the World Conference of Churches, World Council of Churches rather, to observe that December 1990 election. A few days before the election, we had a chance to meet with Aristide, who was then a candidate. And one of the things from that conversation that stays with me is a question that came from a Dominican woman who was part of our delegation. And she said, you've got against you the army and the rich people and the United States and the Vatican and everybody else. How do you think you're going to make this work? And he said in Spanish, basta que haga el camino. It's enough that we make the road, or the way, or the path. So he was determined to go forward. And his movement was called La Valasse, which means a flood. And on the 16th of December, when the election results were coming in, the streets were a flood. It was just a massive movement of everyone coming out with palm leaves, like on Palm Sunday, and celebrating the election of Aristide. And then, so he was installed, 7 months went by, and he was overthrown in a military coup. And it was in a way kind of predictable. And it was in a way necessary, the country, not necessary the coup, but necessary that he had been elected, and that Haitians have that experience of hope, because whatever happened afterwards, and however screwed up it all got, there was a time when Haitians were heard in a coherent, collective way and made their will known to the world. And that was that December 1990 election. So he was overthrown in September of 91, and spent time in various places. I met him again in Toronto, I think in about 93, in a meeting that he had with churches and civil society organizations here. determined to go back. By then, the Reagan-Bush years were over, and Bill Clinton was elected president in the United States. And Clinton, we can go into this a bit further later, but Clinton kind of had a different view of Haiti as a kind of an opportunity for a different kind of development, a different kind of investment. And I think that in those years of sitting at Clinton's knee inside the White House, something happened with Aristide. And when he finally was restored with the backing of US troops in 94, my friends in Haiti say the guy who came back wasn't the same one who left. He had a different set of priorities. He implemented the International Monetary Fund dictates and what have you. And so some of the people who had been supporters before lost interest and stopped supporting him in kind of that period immediately after his return in 94, 95.
Thanks, Jim. Yeah, and I know the story gets even more complicated following that, and that second term is a difficult thing to sort out. We could talk more about that a little bit. I should say, Matt mentioned Aristide as the first liberation theologian president. There was one other I know of, Fernando Lugo in Paraguay. Other than that, I don't know, but I'll
right.
I
was thinking of him too. Yeah, Fernando Lugo, and then like Aristide, it didn't end well. It was.
Yeah. Also a Kud liberation theologian. There seems to be a theme there.
Yeah.
So Aristide was deposed in that first coup, and then also in a second coup later on in the early 2000s, in which the US and Canada and France and the UN all took part. So, yeah, what that means for Clinton or Bush or whatever, I'm not exactly sure, but there's a lot of obviously complicated issues wrapped up there. You've mentioned to us before, some people still support Aristide, others don't. And your partnerships give you a unique window into that situation. We could litigate the Aristide presidency, but I'm especially curious about what do those fractures around Aristide's base mean for Haiti's protests now? Is there any kind of connection there? Is that a thing of the past? What's the lesson?
Yeah, I think that there's it's very important that the movements and their allies overseas find ways of working together to support the people in Haiti as they try to find a way forward. And so one of the things that gives me some hope right now is that some of the divisions from the Aristide years seem to be being overcome. I think it has to be deeper than just sort of, bandages, but people are trying to come together and say that things now have to change. So like at the time of the 2004 coup, when Aristide was overthrown the second time, there were kind of three sectors that I talked to, and at least two of those have kind of come together now. So the first was the business sector, who was opposed to Aristide, but they had always been opposed to Aristide. The second sector was a group of church people and civil society, popular movements who supported Aristide and continue to support Aristide throughout. An important sector, and I know people there too. And then the third sector was that group that I had alluded to before that said, whatever Aristide was about, it was no longer about advancing the interests of the impoverished people of Haiti, and maybe he should have been allowed to serve out his term, but once he was gone, we didn't feel called to bring him back. So those two groups and their allies abroad split into two groups, and there's still skirmishes, I think, hard points amongst us. But I think that what is happening right now in Haiti kind of calls us to come together. And so when you look at the statements that are coming out of Haiti and who's signing them and who, they seem to represent the highest level of unanimity, at least between those two sectors of the popular movement that had been divided pretty much since 2004. They're calling for a new way forward, some sort of unity there's different words for it, and people have said different things. But one of the phrases I liked was like passerelle in French, which is kind of like a gangway, what you get on and off a ship from, that kind of thing. So like a bridge to get to something, some new elections or some new system, some new arrangement. Yeah. So that's I think the hope that comes from those two sectors anyway, the popular movement that supported Aristide, the popular movement that opposed Aristide. Maybe there's some coming together right now. I hope so.
Yeah, I hope so too. That's some really helpful context to the story. Well, I think that maybe we can move the conversation toward what's happening right now in Haiti. I think that I've most head on experienced what's happening in Haiti just via online. I've seen like a lot of pictures, a lot of video on Twitter or wherever. And there's some really fascinating and provoking images and videos of protesters carrying crosses with the flags of the United States, France, and Canada on the beams, symbolizing, the international imperialists crucifying the people of Haiti. I mean, the symbolism is hard to miss.
Yeah.
That being the case, what's the role of international capital and its interest in Haiti? Like, how does Moise relate to those imperial powers in the world?
Yeah. So Moise and his predecessor, Michel Martelly, these two guys are really what the United States wanted. Like since 2011, the United States has really had the leaders that it wanted. Uh, business people who would be loyal to and obedient to the interests of international capital. Um, there's one of the historic problems in Haiti that we all encountered at the different times when rebuilding was required, whether after the coup in '94, or the coup in 2004, or after the earthquake in 2010, was the incredible obstinance of the rich people in Haiti. So there are six, mega billionaires, six wealthy families, and then a few thousand very wealthy enablers. So we call them at times morally repugnant elites, MREs. So, so they have blocked, I'll use the present tense, they block even now any meaningful change in Haiti. And they're different from elites in other countries. Elites in other countries, you sort of see them, well, they want to build monuments or better roads or better airport or what have you. No, these guys are just happy with everybody in misery, terrible roads, terrible bridges, infrastructure that doesn't work. It doesn't matter to them. What they want is cheap labor, working in sugarcane fields or banana plantations, or serving tables in restaurants. And of all the countries I've ever worked in, I mean, the wealthiest people in Haiti have been the absolutely most rigid in their refusal to have any kind of change, and then to use any means possible to block change. And so then you come around. Well, these other people outside the country, the empire builders, with different ideas, like and so if I maybe I should go into the story of the Clintons here just a bit, because it kind of sets up what's happened since 2011 with these two presidents. So Bill and Hillary Clinton, when they were married in 1975, they had their honeymoon in Acapulco, and then they were invited by a friend of theirs who was a senior executive of Citibank to go to Port-au-Prince and see what he was doing in Haiti. And so they went, and I think they were kind of taken by the country and really interested, and really it really grabs you. I mean, the music, the history, the art, the stories, the way people paint and talk and sing, and the the different ways that religion is practiced. All of that is really exciting, and so the Clintons got that, but they also got it with this sort of capitalist veneer, and and Bill in particular talks this kind of populist language, the language of the people, and his accent facilitates that. And Hillary does the sort of, a bit more organized, structured. But the two of them together kind of had this notion of Haiti, and Haiti could be different. But it had to be different in a capitalist way. So their idea was that it would be kind of like a new Taiwan, like this place for assembly plants. And that's what they set out to do, in power and out of power, during Clinton's presidency and later. And when Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, then she was in a position to exercise some influence over how things would unfold. Now, there were two interim periods. So, like Aristide, his first presidency, there was the coup, and then he was returned, and then his time ended, and then the guy who followed him was one of his prime minister, in fact, René Préval, and then after the coup in 2004, there were elections in 2006, and Préval won those elections again and continued as president. And Hillary Clinton did not like Préval, and especially in the period after the earthquake. And there was some fear then that in the period after the earthquake in 2010, there would be a coup. So there wasn't. I mean, I think that's one of the places where France, Canada, Brazil, and a few of the other people around the table said, no, hold on, don't do this again. And so then she found a different way. And it was kind of like, go for this pop star, Michel Martelly, who's a singer, who's known as Sweet Mickey. And I mean, this guy's so shallow that he built his political movement around his sort of the way he looks. He's bald or shaves his head. And so the movement is called Tête Calée, which means bald-headed, so this shallow pop star was elected president of Haiti in 2011, but at the behest of the United States. And people in Haiti weren't stupid. People largely boycotted that election. And I mean, there are a whole bunch of other things that went on in Haitian elections. We don't have time to go into all the details, but like one of the things that kept happening, and I think it was a mistake, was the foreign powers and the Haitian elites prevented the Aristide movement from participating in elections until just I think the 2015 one, 2015, 2016. And but anyway, so in those years, people largely boycotted the elections because it didn't seem like any result would be meaningful. So the turnouts were 20-25%. But that's how Martelly was elected in 2011, and then Moise. The new election for Moise should have been, I think, in 2015, but it didn't. It didn't happen in 2016, and that's why there's this disagreement over how long the period should be, or when the when the term of office should end. So Martelly and Moise have both served the interests of the Haitian wealthy class, those six families, the other few thousand wealthy people, and the interests of the United States and its allies throughout this decade now. But now I think it's come to the end of the road, and the popular movements are able to come together with the churches, the trade unions, the academics, and demand an end to these regimes that are imposed by the United States, with a tiny minority of the voters supporting.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. That's helpful. It's also helpful to bring that in with the context of the Clintons, right? Because I think a lot of people tend to assume interventionist politics are kind of for the Republicans or right-wing ideas. But yeah, there's this kind of strange way in which liberal politicians and also those the liberal heart, I guess, for the poor ends up leading to a lot of really damaging situations. I don't know. Do you have any impression about that kind of conversation too in Haiti and how it relates to the international solidarity movement? Like lots of stuff in the election between Clinton and Trump, kind of litigating her role as Secretary of State. How does all that kind of continue to play into how people are maybe trying to organize in centers of power on behalf of people in Haiti or with them?
Yeah, so there's kind of multiple layers to that. One of them is like around Hillary Clinton and electoral politics in the United States. Like a lot of what is said about Hillary Clinton is invented by Trump and his Breitbart and those folk. So it's hard. It's very hard to sort out the right wing propaganda from what really was true. And I think what really was true was kind of liberal good intentions gone awry. Yeah, and then and then at the same time, a lot of us are subject to that. So there's all those NGOs, the Republic of NGOs, people called it after the earthquake. People like Sean Penn, the Partners in Health, the big medical enterprise. All these people with really good intentions, and even people like me with good intentions. I hope I haven't enabled imperialism. But you kind of look. With some honesty, I look back and I think, yeah, the people that we got involved in Haiti with were the institutional churches. Through them, connected to the grassroots community, the basic community churches, and what have you, and all that movement. And I think been attentive to the tensions between the popular church, and the hierarchy of the Catholic Church in Haiti and the hierarchy of the Protestant churches. But like it's Haiti is filled with stories of people with good intentions who mess it up badly, and I think it all kind of comes back to, who are you listening to? Are you listening to anybody? Do you ever listen to the voices of Haitians? The yeah, it's like some of the, do you like I don't speak Creole, but I've been around it enough that I can kind of sound it out and figure out what's going on and follow along and read texts in Creole and read other things in French. It's so I think I have an idea what's going on. Maybe deluded, but I think that if you go into Haiti with the idea that you've got the plan that will fix the problem, you're not listening to Haitians. Haitians have all kinds of ideas about how to fix their country. Listen to them. That's the starting point.
Yeah, that's a good word. Man, what an instructive thing for people wanting to be in the solidarity movement. It's important to listen to the people on the ground, the voices that are there.
Yeah.
Well, before we were talking, you mentioned that even very recently, some of the churches and religious movements from Haiti had been issuing, responses and statements on the ongoing protests. Maybe you could talk us through some of those. What are the folks on the ground saying?
Well, this again is one of these extraordinary moments that I didn't think I would see, where you have the Catholic bishops, the men and women religious, the priests and nuns and what have you, the Protestant churches, including the Haitian Protestant Federation, which would be the more establishment churches, let's put it that way, and the sort of movement of Pentecostal and evangelical churches that aren't conservative in Haiti. They're pretty progressive. That they're all pretty much on the same side and issuing statements regularly that echo each other, sometimes issuing joint statements. The one today, we're talking on Tuesday, March 9th, and today is the 38th anniversary of the visit by Pope John Paul II. And to save you doing the math, when was 38 years ago? That was 1983. So March 9th, 1983. So a year before Duvalier fell, and John Paul, while he was there, he said, something must change here. Something must change here. So the statement today from the Roman Catholic religious communities in Haiti is the same. It says, something must change here. The Pope, when he left, he said, tête ensemble, a Creole phrase, means everybody be of agreement. Get your heads together, be of agreement. Get yourselves on side with each other. And so that's the message today from the Haitian Religious Conference. The Jesuits have a brilliant statement, and it's out in English, that came out in January. And so they all call for like calm, but a radical kind of calm. The earnest, determined force, popular will, like in 1804, that can bring the regime down and allow for something else to come into place. Something else coming into place, there's some negotiation about that, but the proposals are like what I mentioned before, some sort of interim step. And I think there are people that academics, lawyers, judges, that have been independent enough from the partisan process to be able to be reliable governors in a period leading to new elections. There's also calls for a new constitution. The constitution that they have right now was developed during the period right after Duvalier left, while the military were in power. Except that at different moments there were different factions in power, and it's not an ideal constitution. I mean, it was negotiated by amongst different factions, but not all voices were heard even then. And so there's a willingness to go for a new constitution. But Moise has a proposal for the president. Moise has a proposal for a new constitution that doesn't reflect any dialogue or input from other sectors of the society besides his own coterie. I think everyone agrees that the Constitution from 1987 is too complicated. That Haiti needs a simpler system, a single chamber, and so on. It needs to sort out the problem of the president is elected on one time frame and the Congress is elected on a different time frame, and it just has led to confusion and boycotts and unwillingness to organize elections, and then demands that there be elections. And so just keeping the electoral calendar going has been very hard in Haiti all through these years. So, but better that there be some sort of constitutional assembly like the ones held in Venezuela or Ecuador or Bolivia, that where it's people who are elected to have the task of designing a new constitution, not something that's sort of top down the way we had it in Canada, for example.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And certainly having a different political structure makes different things seem possible or impossible, which is an important thing. Maybe you could talk to us a little bit more too about the role of religious actors and organizations and people in Haitian politics. It's astounding, of course, that Aristide, as a liberation theologian, was elected to power. I know in the 90s, as the Soviet Union was collapsing, there were lots of questions about, will liberation theology still be a thing? And of course, theologians said yes, but many pointed to Aristide as a sort of example that, this form, this expression of Christianity is not going away. And Aristide is not the only example in Haiti. There's lots and lots of other examples. So could you tell us a little bit about that? What's the voice or the expression of something like liberation theology or a kind of left-wing Christianity on the ground in Haiti as it relates to these kinds of efforts for change?
Yeah, I think this is fascinating and complex as well. So like in 1989, in 1991, that period when the Soviet Union collapsed and all that followed. But at the same time, the wars in Central America had been going on, and they were coming to an end. And so in 1989, in November, there was the the Salvadoran military facilitated an attack on the Jesuits in San Salvador, and killed the 6 Jesuits who were in the house at the time, and their housekeeper and her daughter. And these were some of the leading liberation theologians in Latin America. So it was an attack by the Salvadoran army, presumably in cahoots with the United States, at least with their acquiescence, attacking liberation theology in a very direct way. So after that, in Latin America, the liberation theologians themselves tended to talk about Latin American theology, instead of liberation theology. So like within a year of that, there's Aristide, liberation theologian, running for president, and socialism around the world in a kind of a crisis. The Sandinistas had lost their election earlier in 1990. And so I think a lot of us on the left were kind of feeling, where's our hope going? what do we draw from this disaster that's going on all over the place? And Aristide emerged with a sign of hope. So then at the same time as Aristide emerged as a sign of hope, the bishops in Haiti were almost all opposed to him. So there was one, Willy Romulus, really brilliant guy in Jacques Mel, who was much more open to a progressive church and church voice, but the body of the bishops was opposed to Aristide and made it known. So you jump ahead 30 years where we are now. What's remarkable now is that you've got all of the bishops, the religious communities, the popular church, the Protestant churches, all coming together, and in alliance with the social movements that are not church based. So, um, uh, and so if you're asking about where is the popular church expression or the liberation theology expression in Haiti, I think to some extent it's alive and well in these networks of community groups that are maybe not so formally tied to the church, but they're very much Christian expression. So I can remember many times going out into communities where we were with what in the government of Canada terms would be an agricultural project. It's funded by the government of Canada, and people would gather and they'd have the meeting. They'd open with a few songs and a prayer, and then go on with the meeting and go away and with another song and a prayer. So the religious feeling is infused in the popular movement to a very high degree. And then there's some specific expressions that come from Catholic social teaching that you hear all the time, like social and solidarity economy. So that's an expression that's used more in French or Spanish than in English, but it's kind of a term that pulls together what we do in credit unions and cooperatives, community banks, savings and loans, what have you. The really microcredit. That's another expression of it. So when people in Haiti talk about social and solidarity economy, they're picking up a phrase that is used in Catholic social teaching about how to make economic alternatives for the future. And so like a group that I worked with a lot in Haiti is called the Carl Levesque Cultural Institute, ICKL. And the Carl Levesque was a Jesuit priest, a Haitian Jesuit priest, who in the Duvalier years was in exile in Montreal. And after 1984, when Duvalier fell, he was getting ready to go back, and he died suddenly. So the people I know created a movement in his memory, the Carl Levesque Cultural Institute. So it works with farmers in a variety of these social and solidarity economy kinds of projects. And the idea isn't just that people learn how to be, good at running a co-op or running a microcredit organization. or supporting a community economy, but it's also that they develop leadership skills, that they understand the conjunctural politics, like what is going on and what's the correlation of forces right now. How do we take what's happening now and do something with it? What can we do in local politics? So the same kind of strategy that's often used in the States of getting people into local politics to give them some experience and then get them onto another stage later. So that I think is multiplied throughout dozens of social movements, community organizations, the Haitian-based non-governmental organizations, and so when I think about liberation theology now, because of the risk to the people who are the proponents of liberation theology, by calling it that, they're doing the action in 1,000 ways that are deeply meaningful, but not always with the same label. And well, we have eyes to discern what's going on, and so I think that these 30 or 40 years of work now have given enough people a sense of capacity um, to judge, to see what's going on, to make some evaluation or judge what's going on, and then figure out what action they should take. And so the action is what we're seeing now, the action in the streets. But the process that's led to it has been ongoing for 30 and 40 years at least.
It's always really fascinating to hear, these stories about the ways that, a religious imagination ends up working itself out politically like this. Such a cool thing. Well, now that we're kind of towards the end of the hour, maybe we can turn again to the big picture international relations angle to the story. So, Joe Biden and Justin Trudeau have both been pretty silent on the unrest in Haiti, which I think is such a peculiar thing, given their relative loudness about other countries. The U.S. and Canada, they're always basically working overtime to overthrow, Maduro in Venezuela or in Bolivia. But like when it comes to Haiti, the protesters have been in the streets for years, and they actively want a new a new administration, a new leader. Yet the U.S. and Canada have not advocated for regime change or really said much of anything about it. So, what do you think is really going on here with this angle of the story?
Yeah, I think they're proceeding very cautiously. You know, and so the Biden administration it's uh, they're big and complex, and so they've got some hot button issues, Iran and yeah, to deal with, and then just reestablishing trust with other countries in the post-Trump years. So anyway, but we know that there are people on the desks. There's a Haiti desk, and there's a Venezuela desk, and there's a Honduras desk, and they are up to no good. And I think one of the things that you can say, well, Biden will be different from Trump on a whole range of issues: gender justice, racial justice, criminal law, possibly immigration. But the foreign policy between Republican administrations and Democrat administrations tends not to change a whole lot. And there are kind of career people in the State Department, and they don't change a whole lot. Or even if they're out, they're in a think tank and then they come back in. So that and they are always about projecting U.S. power and influence. And why did they do that? It was mostly for the business sector. So Canada and France are kind of the two go-along parties in this. Trudeau and the president of France have a good personal relationship, and tend to land in the same place on a lot of questions. And they're probably working hard to get on the good side of Biden and not do too many things that will annoy him, because they've got other interests. So where will Haiti play in all of that? I have a fear that Haiti will be like Honduras, was in 2009 when Obama came in. There was a progressive government in Honduras. There were already movements underway to overthrow the progressive government, and Clinton either went along with Hillary Clinton either went along with it or aided and abetted it. She later apologized for her involvement in the coup in 2009. But I have this feeling that there's this momentum inside the State Department that what they've been doing for the past 10 years has been the right thing. Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State kind of designed it. Trump didn't mess with it. That's probably going to be what they try to stick with. So they'll try to hold Moise in power for as long as they can. I mean, the way out would be, that they're finally convinced that there is a viable made in Haiti solution, the passerelle idea, that sort of bridge to something else, an interim government that could get to elections without bringing in foreign military. Because I think that's a tactic that won't fly anymore. So the more that the churches, unions, civil society organizations, social movements can stick together and continue to insist on some step towards new elections and a new constitution, the better chance of success. And if anybody in Washington is listening, then Haitians, I think, are ready with a solution. The hard part is breaking that alliance of the six families and their few thousand wealthy enablers and the foreign investors. And so, if the Biden administration were really serious about change in Haiti or allowing serious change to happen in Haiti, they would have to go after the elites. And I don't know that they've got the political will to do that. Well, I doubt they've got the political will to do that. But that's, when you look back over the last 40 years of Haitian history, the best opportunity was supporting the Aristide government in 1990. That would have, had that government received the support it needed then, it would have broken the oligarchy, and we wouldn't be in the mess that we're in now. We're in this mess. The oligarchy is still there. Somehow it has to be broken, and wow, and they have to know that they're broken somehow. It's just this can't, this cycle of brutality just can't be allowed to continue. So some sort of made in Haiti solution that the Biden government can get behind. I hope that works, but it may not be enough unless they can get that elite, the oligarchy, to its share of power.
Well, that the real deep state, I guess I hear you saying, is not the one trying to prevent Trump from staying in power, but it's actually the one trying to keep people like Moise in power.
That's exactly it. It's those people who hang on from one administration to the other that do kind of. I don't think that they didn't have the power to do all the things that Trump said they did, but they do have that power over Haiti.
Sure. That's an important word, though. Important thing to keep on thinking about. I'll be thinking about it for a while, I think, after this episode. Jim, it's great to have you on the show. We appreciate your voice here and what you're up to and the perspective that you bring. I know that you have some other projects in the works. Is there anything you want to plug here at the end before we let you go?
Well, I've relaunched a blog called Unwrapping Development. So it's all that together, unwrappingdevelopment.ca for Canada. And so I'm posting some thoughts. I haven't written about Haiti there yet, but you guys inspired me to do some thinking. So maybe I'll organize this into 600 words. So.
Yeah, good.
But
We look forward
maybe
to
the
it.
other thing I should say is like the work, some of the work that I've been doing and will continue to do is with the United Church around sanctions, the United Church and others around sanctions, particularly Venezuela and North Korea, where we have partners who are affected by the sanctions. And then the other thing I've been working on with Kairos, the Canadian Ecumenical Justice Coalition, has been the whole issue around equitable access to vaccines. In the COVID era, the rich countries have kind of grabbed everything, and the rest of the world can wait. So a new statement will come out tomorrow about that.
Well, thanks again, Jim. I'm sure this will not be the last time that we speak with you as the world continues to do its thing and hopefully moves in some better direction somewhere, but we'll always be grateful for your perspective regardless. Thanks again for coming back to the Magnificast.
Thanks. It's great to be with you, and we'll keep pulling the powerful from their thrones.
Thanks for listening to the Magnificast. If you like what you heard, you can support us on Patreon, patreon.com/the Magnificast. You can also give us an iTunes review. That would be very cool of you to do. Give us a little iTunes review, say something nice about us. Give us 5 of those stars. We need them all to fill the sky with, I don't know. The intro music is from Mario Armstrong. The outro music is by The Illogical Spoon. And we'll see you next week for more of our extremely good Christian leftist content.
I don't wanna get up for church in the morning, souls alive. Heaven come to earth and there won't be no church. We'll meet down by the riverside. There we'll swim with all creation. Never get tired, never bored. Don't worry, someday there'll be no dam between us and our Lord. Jackson, keep your hoods up.